In this episode, I talked to Maria Koppens. Maria was a resident of Muriwai but lost her family home as a result of Cyclone Gabrielle, and she is now living in the neighbouring suburb of Waimauku. Maria shares how she applied her marketing skills to the restoration phase in Muriwai, creating a brand named Restore Muriwai, connecting with politicians and councillors.
Being able to bring these people in, to walk them from house to house. There were like three of us who essentially offered up our houses and told our stories. I think that made it real for them, and it was quite visceral.
And Maria explains the importance of connecting across impacted communities through the creation of surveys and a database, and building a strong presence and relationship with the New Zealand media. Maria talks about temporary accommodation support, insurance, buyouts and categorisations, and also the dispute and independent review processes.
Mistakes can happen. Geotechs aren't always right, and they don't always have all of the information that they need to make the right decision.
Maria shares her feelings around having to move away from Muriwai and settling into a lifestyle property.
Yeah, I guess that the trauma, I don't feel the trauma now, but every now and then, it's a memory. It was a pretty intense period that I hope never to have to go through again.
And she has some great advice for communities impacted by a traumatic weather event.
My name's Maria Koppens. I lived in Muriwai for 18 years, raising a family of 4 kids, and now live in Waimauku. On February the 13th, we evacuated our Muriwai house and took ourselves down to the surf club in the midst of the storm, and never went back. The next day following the storm, we were offered a place to stay at a lovely local family's house. They had an empty basement apartment with 2 bedrooms, and so we spent 6 weeks after the cyclone there. There were 6 of us and 2 beds, so it was not ideal, but the kids managed not to kill each other, so we got out okay of that, but it took us 6 weeks to find a rental. So from April, we moved into the rental. What we were horrified to learn in the first couple of weeks following the cyclone was that our insurance cover didn't cover a landslide that was more than 8 metres from the house. So while we couldn't live there, we also weren't going to get anything back from the insurance company, which we had fully expected too, since we weren't able to live there. So that was our first shock of a series of shocks, I guess. So once we got into our rental and got settled, the focus became then to figure out how we could move on, because it was pretty clear that we weren't going to be able to go back to our house. The next door neighbour's house had slid down the hill. There was a landslide sort of right next to our washing line and across our driveway, and another one up above the house. So there was really no going back, and we were quite aware of that. As a community, and you've probably heard this from some of the other speakers, pretty quickly we got together, because we're a tight-knit community, and formed a committee of sorts with people who wanted to do something. And because Abe and I are marketers, the first thing we thought of doing was to create a brand and a logo, because in order to be represented as a community, we needed an entity with which to represent the community. So we ended up settling with Restore Muriwai as a brand and a logo. One of the local graphic designers, Vic Skinner, created a great logo for us. And from there we built a website and social media platforms. And because the community was shut off from from the outside world. Essentially, no one who wasn't a resident was allowed in. We wanted a mechanism to show the rest of Auckland what was happening and what had happened in the community.
Why did you feel that was important to do that?
We felt that there was a little bit of resentment building from the windsurfers and the kite surfers and people who like to come to Muriwai, that Muriwai was keeping it all for themselves in a sense. And so we thought it was really important to tell the story of what happened to people outside of Muriwai who couldn't come and see it for themselves. And also we knew we would need help. We would need help from politicians. We'd need public support, essentially, to be able to get the kind of support that we knew that we'd need going forward. So the first issue that we tackled was the insurance issue. If we're not covered by insurance but we can't live in our houses, what does that mean? So we reached out to some contacts and got some media coverage around the issue, because a lot of people didn't realise that was a thing, just like we didn't. You can have a house and have insurance, but if something happens and it doesn't actually touch your house, then you have no cover. So we got in touch with Patrick Smelly at Business Desk, who was a family friend of Abe's, and he wrote a great story laying out that issue in the Herald on Business Desk, and sort of explained to the world that managed retreat was the only option for situations like landslides where insurance doesn't cover it, and the other option is financial ruin for anyone who has the bad luck to be impacted. We reached out to politicians, Michael Wood, and when I say we, I mean the community, the committee, everyone who was helping each other to try and get a resolution of some sort. James Shaw came to visit. Michael Wood we'd spent a lot of time talking to Michael Wood and explaining the situation to him.
Was he National or Labour?
He's Labour. He came to visit in May and at the surf club. Unfortunately, in June, he had to resign, so we had to start again. Carmel Cipollone, we spoke to a lot as well. So in May, we were really focused on the issue of insurance and what were they going to do to support people who were in that situation. Our insurance covered nearly 6 months of temporary accommodation cost. That's basically all it did, which was great and very much needed. Particularly, the majority of families were paying rent and then also having to pay their mortgage at the same time. So there was not money to do both of those things. So those who did have insurance had the supplement from the insurance, but that then pretty quickly ran out.
And is that something that's in everybody's policy?
Oh, I couldn't tell you that. It was in most people's policy.
It seemed like a lot of people didn't even know it was there, but it was part of the policy.
No, well, I didn't know it was there in the same way that I didn't know that we weren't covered for the house. But most people who did have insurance were able to get that to a greater or lesser degree. But pretty soon that ran out, and so that was the second issue that we started addressing was, okay, so then what happens? How are people going to survive while they wait for the government and the council to figure out what they're going to do about these houses that people can't live in that are red stickered? So it was quite frustrating for everybody. Whenever anyone called up the Ministry of Social Development, they said, oh, there's this temporary accommodation service, that's who you need to talk to. And then whenever we called up the temporary accommodation service, who said, no, we don't have anything for you, you need to talk to the Ministry of Social Development. So this went on for a few weeks before we finally managed to get the attention of Carmel Cipollone and explain that neither the temporary accommodation service nor the Ministry of Social Development were able to provide any assistance to anybody with temporary accommodation support. Carmel Cipollone came out to Muriwai a few times. We took her and a lot of other politicians and the ombudsman and the deputy mayor. All these people came to our house and to other people's houses so that we could show them what the impact was of the event. But Carmel Cipollone, we met with her in Piha doing a similar thing, and had a chance to explain to her exactly what the problem was. And she was fantastic. As soon as she understood that there was a huge gaping gap that none of the legislation covered, she leapt into action and put in place a temporary accommodation package once people's insurance ran out. One way that we were able to convince her that was possible even was to work also with some lawyers in Christchurch who'd been working on the Christchurch earthquake back in the day, and there was a precedent that we uncovered as part of that, that following the Christchurch earthquakes, I think in 2004, there was a temporary accommodation supplement set up to support people who are in exactly the same position. So because of that precedent, we were able to get it across the line with her, and that way people could then continue to pay their rent and their mortgage after their insurance ran out. So we pretty quickly realised that only having a Muriwai voice was not going to be enough to get the national government and local government attention that we needed to effect change. So we reached out then to other impacted West Coast communities to amplify the voice of the affected, I guess you'd say. So we ran the first survey of West Auckland impacted households in mid-June, and that was looking at the accommodation issue. And looking at how many had mortgages and when their insurance was going to run out, so that we had some data, because it was very clear from the outset that the only thing that was going to really be compelling for decision makers was data. We built a website, and then we started building a database. As the committee, if you like, everyone pitched in and helped. So we started a database first of Muriwai impacted residents, and then when we reached out to the other West Auckland communities, they did the same thing. So they had their own databases. So we would all send out a Google survey to the communities, and then I would collate the results into a report, and would use that for media releases and also for the outreach to politicians as well. So that June survey about the temporary accommodation allowance was one of the things alongside the precedent that we found, the legal precedent that managed to get the Labour government of the time to agree to a temporary accommodation allowance. There was a July survey that we ran as well, which we had at that point expanded the network to all of Auckland and created a new brand and a new website called the Auckland Stickered Residents Group, where we were originally the Muriwai Stickered Residents Group. So now we extended our reach to the rest of Auckland. I'd spent quite a lot of time reaching out to other impacted communities on the North Shore and in South Auckland, and just encouraging them to help us build a database of impacted residents where we could then send further surveys and gather more data.
And how did you know who to actually contact from these different communities?
Word of mouth, and then every now and then somebody would be interviewed by media. So I can't remember. I think I found one person and then they put me onto another person, and I ended up reaching out also to Hawke's Bay to amplify that voice still further. They had slightly different issues, but some of the issues were the same. So that was, and it was really interesting to learn from each other as well, and to learn what the Hawke's Bay Regional Council was doing to support the impacted residents, and how that differed from the Auckland Council, and so it gave us some ideas. So there was a lot of sharing and support that went on amongst the various communities that were impacted by Cyclone Gabrielle. We started focusing then on well-being, and this particular survey went out to Hawke's Bay and also all of Auckland, and I think there were 100-odd responses to that one. And it was looking at financial well-being and psychological well-being amongst those who were impacted, and that was in August. And it was pretty dire by August. It was more than 6 months of being homeless, essentially, and not knowing what the future was going to hold, not knowing if you would ever be able to buy a house again, and whether or not you'd lost everything that you'd worked hard for. A lot of people had big mortgages, had just bought their house at the peak of the market, and were utterly desperate. So being able to get data on that and to be able to add quotes as well, obviously it was all anonymised, but that was super impactful for the politicians and the media as well to keep the conversation going and to keep the groundswell of support, I guess, in the wider community, which I think in the end helped to get the buyouts over the line.
Do you have any advice for communities for actually getting that relationship or building that relationship with the media?
Because I have a marketing background, it was just something I had already done before, although I did draw on the support of some other friends and locals as well who were PR people. So we organised media training for the community very early on. I think that was way back in March. Reached out to some friends of mine and asked them if they wouldn't mind coming and doing some media training for the community. So that helped us then have more confidence with speaking to the news media and knowing what we wanted to say and the points we wanted to get across. From there, later on, once we had expanded our network through to the rest of Auckland and also the Hawke's Bay, I reached out to Sue Kedgley, the former MP who was based in Wellington and was doing media training as like her new job. And I reached out to her just through her website and said, hey, this is our situation. How would you feel about offering media training to the other communities who haven't had the benefit of it and who also need to be able to speak to their situations and what they need. And she did that, bless her. So we had, I think, 3 online sessions with people around the city where they got media training. And then when we did a press release, we would be able to offer up, people that they could talk to. So it wasn't always directed at Muriwai. It was a much broader issue. So all of this was ongoing, and the surveys really helped to give us the data that we needed to be able to do that outreach. And there were other people besides Sue Kedgley who were just amazing and helpful. Penny Hulse is the former deputy mayor. She ended up coming to Muriwai, took us under her wing, if you like, and she explained the inner workings of Auckland Council to us and made some introductions to some of the councillors. And that was invaluable in enabling us to know how to navigate our outreach with Auckland Council when it came to talking about buyouts later on in the year. Linda Greenalch was the Auckland Council Recovery Office community person. She was amazing. She, if we had something that was urgent, I could just give her a call and she would get onto it. She would, get into council and talk to who needed to be talked to make sure they were all aware. And Leslie Simpson, the deputy mayor, was also amazing. She came out here a couple of times to visit and do some disaster tours. And she was always available to listen and flag things as urgent if they appeared to be. So there were lots of people, and that was the most amazing thing. It was a crazy, very busy couple of years, but we met so many amazing people who were really helpful.
And do you think getting those people actually into Muriwai was key?
I think so, because it's very hard to explain what happened if you can't see it. It was just extraordinary, the devastation that happened overnight, and waking up to that and seeing that as, it was, and then they closed the village, so nobody else could see it except for the media footage. So actually being able to bring these people in, to walk them from house to house. There were like 3 of us who essentially offered up our houses and told our stories. And I think that made it real for them. And it was quite visceral. You could see that it impacted them. And Phil Wilson from Auckland Council, the CEO of Auckland Council, he came on one of those tours. I remember speaking with him afterwards, after we had gotten our categorisation. And I said to him, it's just simply not possible that you have given our house a category 2, which means that they're expecting us to go back after making some minor sort of, catch a few stones type remediations. And he said, yes, no, I remember being there, and not that he got involved in our dispute. So the third issue that we came across after the insurance and then the temporary accommodation support was buyouts and categorisations. The conversation started happening that the only solution was managed retreat and buying out the Category 3 properties that would not be possible to live in again ever.
What do you mean by managed retreat?
Managed retreat being removal from the danger, so taking people out of a place that's dangerous. So rather than saying I could go and live in that house even though a landslide will likely fall on it, then they'll essentially pay them to go elsewhere, to swap a house they can't live in for a house that they can live in. I think it mostly refers to preventing the situation from happening. So in a flood-prone area or a place where there's coastal erosion, down in Wairoa, I think on the west coast they're talking about it. Communities as a whole, if they can be happy to leave their houses behind and go and move somewhere else, then that's ultimately probably less expensive and much less traumatic than having everything devastated by a natural disaster and then having to pick up the pieces afterwards. So that's the conversation that's happening now with climate change. It's inevitable that there will be future events that are similar in different locations, and so how to deal with that, who's going to pay. It's huge. As this conversation was happening around buyouts and whether that, how they were going to go about doing that, this was in September of that year, 2023. Us in Muriwai and the Piha crew, and then a representation of the Auckland Stick and Residents group, we together put together a deputation for Auckland Council where we were advocating for a buyout valuation process that would be considered to be fair, so that there would be a market valuation or a CV, but you could potentially choose. In the end, they settled on a market valuation, which didn't work so well for people who had bought at the peak, but it was better than just having a CV valuation for most people. And the other thing we advocated really strongly for was an independent review process. Through talking with our counterparts in Hastings, that was something that they had gotten as part of their settlement process. Was as part of that there was a process by which they could dispute either the valuation that they had been given for their house or the category that they had been given for their house. And why we thought that was important was that mistakes can happen. Geotechs aren't always right, and they don't always have all of the information that they need to make the right decision. So we gave that deputation to the governing body on the 28th of September, and then on the 6th of October, Council decided on the buyout process that was to be put in place. And there was an independent review within that process, which we were very pleased about, particularly as a couple of months later we were given our categorisation just before Christmas. And it was a Category 2, which means that with some minor remediations that had to be worth less than a quarter of your CV value, you should go back and live in your house. There were a lot of problems with, in my opinion, the framework that they used for the 2P process for getting your, essentially it put the onus on the homeowner to go and quote how much it was going to cost to get the remediation done, and to establish that it was going to cost less than 25% of the CV, or that it was not going to cost less than 25% of the CV, at which point it would flip over then into a Category 3, which meant a buyout. Homeowners don't have experience with doing that kind of thing. Just getting a geotech in to do a proper study of the property costs like $30,000 or more.
And were the homeowners having to pay upfront for that, or was that funded?
No, the homeowners had to do all of the research and then put a report together that showed exactly what was going to be done and exactly how much it was going to cost. They would put that to council, and council would then either accept or reject it. If they accepted it, then the money would become available from council to do those remediations. Problem is they only had a year to do that, to actually get it finished. Whereas it can take months and months just to get a geotech to come and have a look. The proposed mitigations were frankly laughable. There was like a net that was going to catch some rocks, and you've seen what happened to our next door neighbours. There was no way a net was going to stop that whole hillside falling off, so it was just a bit ridiculous. So we fought quite hard to get our categorisation changed to a 3 so that we could just get on with our lives essentially. And
receive a payout.
And receive a payout so that we could buy a house and move on with our 4 kids. So fortunately, we got a geotech report. We did a lot of work to dispute the category, and we were successful in the end. So that was by I think July the following year, 2024, we had our valuation. And then we were in our next house by the end of the year, the end of 2024. So it was a 2-year, very, very busy, very stressful period with, sounds strange to say, lots of highlights just because of the community support and the amazing people who all sort of banded together to try and help us get through and get a good resolution, not just for us but for everyone else that was impacted, predominantly in Auckland because Hawke's Bay had a separate council.
You bought a house in Waimauku, and it's a lovely spot that you've got there, which is great that you found that, and it did take some time to find it. How did you feel about moving away from the community, and how do you feel now?
We were like most of the impacted people in Muriwai. It was a huge shock to suddenly, from one day to the next, not have your house that you had been in for decades in many cases and raised a family in, and it was a great shock, and it was a lot of grief around it. And most of us were very keen to remain within the community because it's a fantastic community. However, obviously there was limited housing stock to start with, and the fact that 68 houses, I think, ended up being category 3 and unable to, demolished essentially, meant that there were not that many houses available to live in, and we also had a very heightened sense of risk. So every single house that we looked at and were even vaguely serious about, I read the property file, I read any geotech reports that there were, I looked at the flood map, there was no way we were going to end up in that situation again because it was really traumatic. So we were very careful, and there wasn't a property that came up in Muriwai that was suitable for a family of 6, and it just wasn't one that worked for us. So the next best thing was to move close. So we did, and we found a lovely spot in Waimauku, which has a similar feel to our old house in that there's a sort of wide open vista, if you like. We had a sea view from our old house, and now we have a valley view, which has a very similar feel to it. And we never would have moved into a lifestyle property had what happened not happened. But we're very happy there. So, all's well that ends well, I guess. Yeah. And we're close to Muriwai still, so we come here all the time.
You were involved, or you actually instigated the commemorative sculpture that was built by Jeff Thompson. Can you tell us, please, how that all got started and what your intentions were for that?
Sure. So as with everything else during that couple of years, once we'd sort of tackled one problem, we moved on to the next problem. Once we'd tackled the problem of our category being wrong, and getting that rectified, we then had a bit of space to think about something else. And Abe and I had spoken of, wouldn't it be cool to have a sculpture, something that, remained after all the houses had been stripped away, just as, partly a cautionary tale and partly as a a place for people who had left to go back to sort of remember. And Abe suggested Jeff Thompson. Abe's been a big fan of Jeff Thompson for years and years. We have actually a beautiful Jeff Thompson piece that we got for our wedding. So Jeff had come out and had a look around our garden and then gone away and basically replicated the flora and fauna that were outside the house. This was our old house. And brought it in and made a beautiful sculpture. So we'd known Jeff through that, and so we reached out to him in, I think, March 2024 and said, "Hey Jeff, we've got this idea, what do you think?" And he was really keen to get involved. So I reached out then to a few fabulous locals who are very good at getting things done, like yourself, Mandy, and Claire with the MCA, and Meta, who's another local artist, and Joss, of course, who creates many of the events that happen around art in the neighbourhood. And so we all got together and everyone was keen to be involved, which was amazing. And so the first thing to do was to reach out, once everyone was happy to sort of consider the project, to reach out to the trail group who were responsible for the deconstructions of the houses, and to get them on board with the idea of making some of those materials from the houses available to Jeff to incorporate into the sculpture. They were keen. They were pretty helpful. Jeff liaised mostly directly with the trail team to recover materials as the houses were being demolished, and the idea was to have it, if possible, something from every house that's deconstructed, unless the previous owners didn't want that to happen, and there were a couple who didn't. But on the whole, people liked the idea of having a piece of their old house still remaining in Muriwai to come back to and visit. So we started fundraising in November of that year, so about 6 months after we had sort of gotten the ball rolling with the materials and getting Jeff to collect them. We settled on a concept pretty quickly. It was fairly unanimous, wasn't it? And the fundraising was quite extraordinary. I think because everyone was just sort of so focused on making it happen, we managed to raise the funds in a very short period of time, and basically covered the entire cost of the sculpture through that fundraising. So there was no public funds at all put into the sculpture. We did a deputation to the local board in July of that year just to get permission from them to go ahead to use the land for that purpose. It was regional parks land. Regional parks also had to approve our application for, I can't remember what it was called, but they did, which was great. And so we were able to put the sculpture on regional parks land right next to the ranger station, which was a kind of a meeting point during the aftermath of the cyclone.
You worked so hard, Maria, in the community to get things done. What did you do about your actual paid job?
Well, funnily enough, I did work quite hard to get things done, largely out of a very strong sense of self-preservation. But I did manage to keep my boss happy at the same time. I don't know, I recently left that job and went to another one, and as part of the farewell morning tea speech, he sort of was explaining what had happened soon after I started the job, and saying that he'd seen no loss of productivity at all, and which I was pleased about, because I did sort of have to spend a little bit of time doing other things here and there. But I did also work quite hard because it was a distraction. So work was great because I didn't have to think about the cyclone, and then working on the cyclone stuff was great because it gave me a sense of control, purpose, for want of a different word. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't waiting for things to happen. I was just trying to, do my best to get an outcome that would work for us and everyone else.
How did the experience affect you emotionally at the time? And have those feelings changed over time?
It was super stressful. A lot of grief, around, a life that we had that was suddenly gone. It's not rational, but it is, I think, an experience that people who are displaced suddenly all have. Fortunately, we weren't in a war zone, and it wasn't that everything got blown up, and, there are worse things in the world. But being displaced is a really horrible experience. It's very stressful. It's the uncertainty that's the worst part, which was why I guess I worked so hard on trying to get certainty to happen, because it made me think less about the uncertainty. But that's definitely the worst bit. So yeah, a lot of trauma. A lot of highlights though too, I have to say, with the community response and just the support was just amazing. And people would turn up with a box of food just because, and there was so many kindnesses all the time, and people like Sue Kedgley, who would offer up her time to run media workshops just out of the goodness of her heart. Penny Holtz, who was just amazing and spent so much, just so many good things as well. So how has that changed over time? I think being in a new house fixed that feeling of uncertainty and displacement. I've spent a lot of time in the garden, digging holes, planting trees, which is very therapeutic. I guess that the trauma, I don't feel the trauma now, but every now and then, it's a memory. It was a pretty intense period that I hope never to have to go through again. And, if there's anything that I can do to share the experience that we had, what worked for us in terms of getting a good outcome, then I would love to be able to help anyone else who ends up being in that position, or any work on the managed retreat process. And I've spoken to council, given them some of the surveys that we did so that they could understand from the perspective of, the people who were impacted. I've also been speaking to a woman who's been writing a book about managed retreat. And that video that I shared with you that we did for the sculpture deputation for the local board, she showed that at the recent Christchurch Climate Adaptation Conference. So just anything like that where you can share the stories, I think it's really important. Because we had no idea. We had no idea that the land was unstable and that it would do that. And we had no idea that we weren't covered by insurance. We had no idea that there would be no financial support for accommodation to stop people going bankrupt while they were waiting for everyone to decide what to do with the Category 3 houses. We had no idea, and nobody else. A lot of people still have no idea, but the more that we can share the story, hopefully the better prepared the country will be for the challenges that will come.
What would you say to other communities going through a similar event?
There's power in numbers, that getting support from outside the community and maintaining support from outside of the community is really important. So finding a way to tell the story is super important, so that people understand what it is that, what the issues are and what can be done to help resolve them. Reaching out to other impacted communities and banding together and telling that story together. And then the advocacy piece was huge. Media, reaching out to politicians in a way that will get their attention and help them understand, and the statistics that we were able to pull together from the surveys that we did of the impacted communities enabled us to tell that story in a convincing way.
And to finish, Maria, is there something hopeful or meaningful you'd like to leave us with?
I think I mentioned earlier that a lot of positive moments happened throughout the couple of years following the cyclone. And that was the positive things were all around humanity, people coming together to help as just an immediate instinct, people sacrificing things or time or whatever it was that they were sacrificing to try and make things better. So I think it really made me conscious of humanity and the good that's in humanity, and council, as difficult as they were to deal with sometimes, they all just wanted to get the best outcome that they could, given the restrictions that they had. And the people, there was so much humanity in them and in the politicians who came to visit, and in the community, of course. So I think that in that sense, that left me with quite a lot of optimism about the human response to adversity, and that I would hope that people would always have that instinct to help others.
Precipice was commissioned and funded by Muriwai Community Association, supported by the Auckland Council Recovery Office. Artwork by Taylor Williams, soundtrack by local Muriwai band Tin People, written in response to Cyclone Gabrielle. Ngā mihi thank you to the Muriwai community for their input and bravery and for sharing their stories. And thank you for listening.